Hi everyone, it's 8 p.m. and the date is, I do this every week. Alana,
The
what's today's date?
25th of August.
25th of August. Can you believe we're in the middle of a heat wave again, Alana? It's Scotland.
It's unbelievable.
We're having our second heat wave. We are melting, and I know that you're all really, really excited for tonight. So welcome to this episode of 21st Century Saints, which is a podcast and live stream series for members and those affiliated with or adjacent to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the United Kingdom and around the world. So welcome to our audience, and we're just going to jump right in because we're not going to tease you anymore. You've all been waiting all month for our special guest, Professor Patrick Q. Mason. Welcome.
Yeah, it is great to be here. Thank you.
We also have our co-host, Alana, who does more than just tell us what time it is. And Alana, do you want to say hi to our audience?
Hi, everyone.
I am very aware that a lot of our audience in the UK are just often getting to know some of the broader Mormon culture that people in America are kind of used to. So we do have huge book fans and people who watch podcasts and see, YouTube talks and things like that. For those who don't know who you are, Professor Mason, would you give us a little bit of a biography?
Well, there's no reason anybody needs to know who I am. So I am born and raised in Utah. I was born and raised a member of the church. And then I went to BYU and eventually went to graduate school at the University of Notre Dame here in the U.S., not Notre Dame in Paris. So I got my PhD in history. So I'm a professor of history and of religious studies. I've been around a little bit. We've lived in Indiana and in Egypt and in Romania, and now we find in California. And now we find ourselves in Utah the last couple of years. So I teach at Utah State University and have a position that's dedicated to Mormon history and culture. So I have a whole bunch of academic books and articles that nobody reads, and then I have a couple of books that were written a little bit more for the church that a lot more people have read. So that tells me something about the relative merit of my scholarship.
Well, sorry, Alana, when you go.
No, I just said fabulous. That was all.
When we were having our pre-show chat, you had invited us, that we could call you Patrick. I don't know. Have you guys seen the Spider-Man trailer? I know, Alana, Marvel's not your thing. Have you seen the Spider-Man trailer that came out?
I haven't. Yeah.
Okay, so y'all aren't geeks. The geeks in our audience will totally know that there's a moment where Doctor Strange is saying to Spider-Man that you don't have to call me doctor anymore. So you don't have to call me sir anymore because we've been through a lot. And so Peter Parker calls Doctor Strange Stephen, and Stephen is like, that's so weird. So I feel even though we have permission, it's weird for me because you are Professor Mason. So Alana, you do your thing if you want to go with the formalities. The other reason I'm sticking with Professor is that we have a huge Harry Potter fan in our home. And if I spend all night saying, so Professor Mason, he's going to want to talk to me and know what this is all about.
Right, yes.
Oh yeah, I have reasons. Okay, so back to business. So you were raised in the church. You've served a mission, right?
I did, yeah, to Seattle, Washington.
Tell us a little bit about your background in the church. What kinds of thing have you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm born and raised in the church and in Utah, in a suburb of Salt Lake City. So I was surrounded by it, right? I mean, very different than many of your listeners in the UK, I assume. And so in a lot of ways, I took it for granted, but it was also always really important to me. I was, joke that, some people are good at science, other people are good at math or good at music. Like, I'm good at religion. Not that I'm a particularly like holy or devout or pious person. I love religion. I get religion. I love our religion. I love other people's religions. Just religion is kind of like the thing I do. And it's always, and religion has been relatively easy for me. In not that I don't have my doubts and questions and concerns, and we can talk about all that kind of stuff, but I slide into it easily. And I think it helps to be a white male in our church. It makes it a little. I mean, essentially, the church was made for and by people like me, so it's a comfortable. It's always been a pretty comfortable place for me to be. Again, despite my questions and concerns and so forth, and so and my parents. Are both members of the church, and my dad was my bishop when I was a teenager. But they also modeled a kind of there's a phrase I like, which is generous orthodoxy, which is that they're believers and very committed to the church, but not in a kind of strict or puritanical type of way. There was a kind of generosity to the way that they were and are in the world, a curiosity about the rest of the world, and openness to it. And so there was no doubt that in our family we were members of the church, and that was a centerpiece for our family life. But it also was not harsh or overbearing in any way. It was just kind of the water that we swam in, and that. And so that made for a pretty easygoing experience being raised in the church.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So what? This is just me wanting to know this. Like, what kind of callings have you held then in the church? Like, what's your?
So I've had a number of different things, from nursery and primary and activities chair. I was really bad at that because I'm not good at throwing parties. To Sunday school teacher. My favorite calling is be a gospel doctrine teacher. I've been elders quorum president a few times. Ward mission leader. I've been in a bishopric. So kind of the range.
Part of the whole mix then.
Yeah.
So when you immediately, I'm struck by the fact that you, as a faithful member of the church, taking your career, completely out of the equation, just as a member of the church, you are mentioning, the fact that, you have questions, and there's things that aren't, it's maybe a bit complicated in some areas, and that's not hugely common. And I wonder if that's why you're so well loved. Could I invite you to maybe bring us up to your book? Now, in general, the books that you have written have had a huge impact. But I think it would be great maybe if we talk about the specific ones. This is your most recent one, Restoration: God's Call to the 21st Century. Now, the title alone, is very much appealing to, that this is our podcast. We're about how the church is working, the conversations that we need to be having in a 21st century church, that often we seem to be holding on to 19th century ways of doing things or attitudes. So would you introduce us to your book? What motivated you to write this, and how come how come your finger's on the pulse? What are you hearing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Those are great questions. I mean, I really like talking to members of the church and hearing their wide variety of experiences. And I'm not, maybe it is because of the kind of comfortable upbringing I had in the church and the positive experiences I had. I think also my academic training helps here. I'm not particularly afraid of anything, of questions or of things like that. I'm very comfortable in my own skin, and I'm comfortable with other people being comfortable in their skins too. I have a deep. I mean, I think one of the themes that I develop in the book, and that's really important to me, is the notion that our heavenly parents love all of their children, that our heavenly parents are the authors of all of the diversity we see in this big, beautiful, crazy world. And so if our Heavenly Mother and Father can love the world, and if they can love all of their children, then I can try to do that too. And so this book for me, so my previous book for the church was really kind of all about faith crisis and maybe adopting a different kind of framework to think through different issues and difficult issues in the church. But for me, it always begins from acknowledging reality. Right. I don't think we do ourselves any service, do ourselves a service if we start from the way that we wish the world was, rather than the way that the world really is. And so I started Planted by talking about the pain and struggle of people who are going through faith crisis, and I tried as best I could to describe that, and then I went from there. And I'm gratified that people said, "Yeah, you captured sort of my experience," and I was glad to do that. In this book, I wanted to make, in a lot of ways, Planted, the way I put this is using kind of a sports metaphor, is Planted is sort of playing defense, right, for the kind of criticisms or concerns or questions that people have. How do we kind of play defense, and how do we think about that? And I think it's important to do that. But on any team in any sport, right, if you're in a football match, you got to prevent the other team from scoring goals, but you got to score goals too, right? And I think we have to make a positive argument for our faith. And we have to make a positive argument for what, in particular, our faith, our religion means to us and could mean to the world. And that's where restoration is. I was thinking about, this anniversary of 200 years since Joseph Smith walked into the sacred grove and had the first vision. And I'm a church historian. I love the history of the church. I study it. I write about it. I publish about it. But I don't live in the past. I live in the present and in the future. And so this book, I didn't want it to look backwards. I wanted it to look forward, and to say, what in the world does this religious tradition that's now 200 years old, which is significant, but we're still a baby compared to other religions. I mean, we're just an infant still getting our feet under us. What in the world might we do in our third century, and in the 21st century? What do I hear God calling us to do in the restoration? So that's what I was trying to do with this book, is just think about, and I was thinking really about my students, about these amazingly brilliant and smart and engaged, 19 and 20 and 21 and 22-year-olds, some of whom are returned missionaries, others are trying to figure things out, others are not members of the church. And what in the world does this religion have to say to them and to their world? And so that's what I was trying to do in the book.
You introduced this idea of, I think I have a few possible signal problems here with my internet, so I'm really sorry. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. You introduced the idea in the book of a fortress church, and it really resonated. So could you maybe, keeping in mind, I would like people to go and buy your book. So, don't go too into depth here, but could you talk to us a little bit about the idea of a fortress church? And is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? What do we do with that concept?
Yeah, so this comes out of the time that we lived in Romania for a few months in 2015, I think. And we visited, and Romania has these incredible 13th, 14th century fortress churches, these kind of Saxon churches that literally, it looks like a castle because it has, the wall around it and so forth, but it's actually the church inside. And that's where people would flee for safety, from the murdering hordes or, whoever was invading on any given day. And so they would flee into the church for safety and close the doors and kind of hunker down in the church. And I think that's, but while those churches were really interesting to visit, they were really kind of museum pieces and they didn't have much to say to the 21st century world, except as a way to kind of look to the past, right? They were kind of a relic of the past. It's just a metaphor, but it seems that as a metaphor, that's one mode that we have often been in our church, is running into the safety of the church, closing the doors behind us, building the walls between us and the world, right? And of course, there are certain scriptures that suggest that is an appropriate mode sometimes, right? Flee Babylon, right? Touch not the unclean thing, right? There is be in the world, but not of it, right? And these kinds of this kind of language. So I think, there have been times where our people have genuinely been persecuted, right? They've genuinely been hounded. They've genuinely needed to circle the wagons in a very, literal way to protect themselves and to preserve themselves. But it seems to me that, as I read the scriptures, as I read Jesus's call to us, that can never be the default mode for religious people, especially for Christians, because our commission is to go out into the world, right? To bless the world. And you can't do that from inside the fortress. And so, there might be times that you have to kind of retreat and build the walls and build a certain kind of strength from within. And I think we largely did that in the late 19th century, for much of the 20th century, building this kind of division between us and the rest of the world. And this could manifest in all kinds of ways, in the ways that we talked about science or the way that we talked about other religions, the way that we talked about, any number of things. It was kind of us, and then it was the rest of the world, a very kind of oppositional stance. But again, I think that at some point, if we want to fulfill our mission that Jesus has given us, to have an effect on the world, to transform the world with goodness, you can't do it from inside the fortress. At some point, and you can't just do it in missionary mode, right? You have to actually go out and engage with the world the way that the Savior did, right? I mean, he was out among the people every single day, all kinds of people, and he wasn't scared by that, and he showed compassion to them. And it seems to me that, of course, as in all things, he's our model for how we can engage the world. And
then sorry, Alana, did you?
No, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, that really spoke to my heart. Jane, I'll tell you, that's something I really struggle with. And I know we can do it personally, go out into the world and minister to people and things. But I feel, especially, and I can only speak to the UK at the minute, in my own ward and things, like, I feel we don't do enough for our communities. I mean, The example that I gave was at the start of lockdown, someone that I know had got something from another church who dropped off a loaf of bread and a nice wee note with a number and everything, and I'm thinking, and they were thinking, like, what are we doing for our communities? We're a church, people have this issue with our church because, like, we held an event once. It was the Singing Children of Africa. I don't know if you've heard of them, and we'd arranged it at the church building, but people just didn't come because it's the Mormon church. That's what people know us as, and I feel that we really do lack in that, and that is a big thing that I struggle with, is because I feel there's so much more that we really need to be doing in that aspect, and obviously, again, I don't necessarily see it so much in the UK because we are such a small community of LDS, but I've been hearing people's stories lately as well of their kids not being allowed to affiliate with people who are not members of the church, or as friends and things like that, and that disheartens me because welcome to the world of my daughter and her cousin.
For our podcast viewers, we've had our weekly visit from Alana's daughter Daisy, and it's as glorious as it always is. It's our favourite moment of the week.
I hope she's getting paid for her guest appearances.
No, she gets paid just in general. See, I know I've probably lost my train of thought now. What was I talking about?
So you were talking about church communities, and we don't have a lot of resources in the way of people here. And
I just feel like, like you're saying, that I feel there is that barrier sometimes, because, there are people who haven't even heard of the church. Then you've got the people who do hear of the church, but, it's all the bad they know. And I think we need to be doing so much more good so that people know us as, and I don't very often like to use the word normal, but sometimes I think people view us as, not normal, we're not Christian, and I feel like that's something that really needs a lot of work, is to allow us to, I mean, I guess, like you say, for some parents, I can see where they're coming from in regards to not wanting their kids to maybe get involved in certain things with friends. Sure. But how does that look to the people on the outside if people are saying, well, I can't be your friend because you're not the same religion as me? And, I'm not saying every parent's like that, but I have heard a lot of stories where that's been the case. Or if someone's left the church, has been a friend of someone, you know, they're shunned and they're not allowed to have that friend anymore. And I think that's sad, because, like you're saying, you know, that's not Jesus' way. That's not what he would have done. You know, you don't just, like, friendship. I've always said it. Friendship shouldn't be really based on religion. It shouldn't be, and like affiliating with people on the outside shouldn't be based on what religion they are.
Yeah, and we've heard this in General Conference. I mean, where our leaders have specifically told us not to do that, right?
But that's where I struggle, because why are people
Right.
still doing it then?
Right.
You know, if
Right.
they're hearing it from the top, why are they not doing?
Yeah, and of course, none of us are perfect. We're all trying to figure it out. Parenting is really hard, right? It's very complicated.
Absolutely.
You know, so but that's exactly right. That, you know, one of our greatest strengths as a community is our lay ministry, right? That everybody just rolls up their sleeves and pitches in, right? We don't have any trained clergy, we don't have any paid clergy, right, at the local level, and so we're just figuring this thing out. Right. And we're all doing other stuff. We work jobs. We have families. We have other kinds of things. So just to hold the church congregation together and to do what's necessary to run a ward or a branch is exhausting. Right. And then to think about, like, how do we add on top of that any kind of community engagement? I mean, so I understand how difficult it is. The key, I think, is to try to find ways to do it all at the same time, right? So rather than to do church and then community, how do we build community engagement into the kinds of activities that we do in our wards and branches? And we have to be known. I think you're exactly right, Alana, that we are known for being missionaries, right? And in the 21st century, that doesn't fly for a lot of people, for an increasingly secular culture, certainly in the UK and in the US and in other places as well. And so what did Jesus say? How would his followers be known? What would the mark be that somebody was a true Christian? It would be the love that they showed for other people, right? And so not the fact that they wore a white shirt and tie and rode around on a bicycle, right? And so if we became known as the people who love others, right? If that was our brand, right? That's what Jesus invited us. It's very hard to do. I'm oftentimes not very good at it, but that's what Jesus invited to do. In terms of how will people know who you are? By the love that you show for others.
Well, isn't that the first two great commandments? You know, love God and love your neighbour. So, you know.
What really interests me is I was going to wait till a little bit later on, but I think we're really fortunate in our podcast that we're able to speak to British experiences uniquely, because, you know, we're here. That when Alana's someone who's sort of for the moment taken a step back from church, I'm still engaged in church. It's still very important to me. I see the church as, you know, that's my business. I should know about these things. When you talk about the Fortress Church, I love that we can take these ideas and apply them to specific people. So when we talk about people who are not coming to church anymore, we know their names. We know who they are. We have had relationships and experiences with these individual people. So we can be very sort of specific in, you know, the situations that we're looking at. And for me, when I think about the Fortress Church, there are so many examples. We see it all the time in how we speak about, you know, us versus the world. But I've been thinking when I was sort of reading your book, and I was thinking about how I do that. I like to think that I'm super understanding, that people can talk to me. I'm one of the cool ones, you know. But when Alana says, you know, something along the lines of, you know, kids not being allowed to play with other kids, I immediately get defensive. I get impatient. I get angry. I want to respond, you know, like those are kids in this little area of America. They're weird, okay? That's a weird thing. They've been told not to do it. They keep doing it. Go figure that. That couldn't happen in the UK, or you would literally never speak to anyone.
No, you would never have any friends, for sure.
Yeah. So it doesn't come up on my radar. And because it doesn't come up on my radar, I have this instinctive feeling that, well, it shouldn't be important to you either. So broadening that a little bit, how can I respond when someone's expressing concerns to me or wants to have a conversation about how they're feeling or how they're processing something because it's important to them, how can I deal with the fact that I feel angry, impatient, and frustrated?
Yeah, well, that's, religion isn't just a kind of intellectual thing. I mean, it's in our gut, it's in our heart, it's kind of who we are, especially this religion, right? And so there is this sort of tribal sensibility, and I mean that actually in the best way of that, right? These are our people. This is my people. This is who I am. This is my identity, right? And especially like outsiders, like you don't get to say that about my people, right? My family. Like inside the family, we can all fight with each other, right? But as outsiders, don't get to criticize the family. But we even get impatient inside the family too. And I think for me, this happens all the time. I just open my Twitter feed, and and I'll get impatient with with some of the things I read there. But then I always remind myself, I have to go back and be grounded in the very basis of my religion, which is the covenant I made to become a Christian, which I did when I was baptized. Now, for me, I was 8 years old. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But now, several decades later, I reflect upon that promise that I did make as an 8-year-old. And what I promised was that I was willing to bear other people's burdens, and that I would comfort those that stand in need of comfort, and I would mourn with those who mourn. And it doesn't say that I get to choose what kinds of mourning that I'm going to mourn with, right? Okay, you have cancer, I'll be there for you, but you have criticisms about the church, sorry, I'm out of here, right? So we don't get to choose. We don't get to be selective. The covenant, the promise, the bedrock promise we've made, the first promise we made as Christians was to enter into other people's pain and sorrow. And we do that because that's what it means to follow Jesus. That's exactly what the atonement is. That is the heart of the atonement, is that God comes into the world and he enters into the world's pain and sorrow. And he's not selective. He's not choosy. He's not like, no, that one, but not that other one, right? He enters into all of it. The atonement, there is no sin or evil or question or pain or sorrow or sickness or anything where the atonement doesn't go. And so, however imperfectly, right, that's what we're called to do too. Now, our covenant also says that we should stand as a witness at all times, in all places, in all things, right? It's interesting that comes after the comforting and the mourning with and the bearing burdens. But there is, it is important to stand for the things we believe in, to be firm in the things that the Spirit has told us and our experiences that we've had. But at least the way the covenant is written, the first thing we do is to try to reach out with and have empathy for others. It's very difficult to do, but I try to ground myself in that covenant.
That is huge. That is everything. That is the gospel. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you're so well loved. I think that's why people can tell you these things. I had learned that I'm experiencing some kind of grieving process, that the anger that I'll sometimes instinctively feel is me processing what I think is the loss of the way something looked. It's not going to look like that all the time. So,
and you know what, that feeling matters too. And what I always tell folks, who are going through a faith crisis or stepping away from the church, is that I hope they're not stepping away from the Christian virtues too, right? And so they also have an opportunity to attend to your grief and your sorrow, all right? So their pain matters, your pain matters, right? Regardless of our relationship to the institutional church at any given time. The way of Jesus is the way of compassion. And that applies to all of us, regardless of our circumstances. So your pain matters just as much as their pain.
And I think what I feel like I do when I am overwhelmed with feelings or instinctively reacting in impatience or frustration, or I just feel that I'm right, or it's, or hurry up so that you can express this thing so that I can then give you the minimum mourning, and then I have to stand as a witness.
Right.
I've got a job to do. That if someone is trying to come to Christ and they're not finding Christ because they're finding me, even if I'm standing testifying of Christ, I'm still in the way. I guess I'm wondering, how do I take me out of the equation? How do I take my ego out of the equation?
That's the great question. I mean, so I would say that I don't think you're supposed to take yourself out of the equation. You are absolutely part of the equation. One of the beautiful things about Latter-day Saint theology is the way that we know that we are co-workers with God, right? Yes, we're his instruments and, vehicles, and we want God's grace to come first, and we want to point people to Christ. But we're also we're part of this, right? We are absolutely part of this, and he wants us to be. He's training us to be like him. And so I don't think it's about removing ourselves, but it is, what you said at the end is exactly right. It's removing our ego, right? It's removing the sense that this is about me, and what you're telling me, and sort of getting defensive, right? And in the sense that whatever you're going through somehow reflects on me, right? And if you're stepping away from the church, that's actually a judgment of me, and I've got to get my hackles up and no, really, this is why I'm staying in the church. And I mean, it's the hardest thing to do. This is why it's at the heart of every world religion, right? Not just ours. But how do you deal with the ego, right? And how do you not get rid of it? Because again, in our religion especially, we are eternal beings, right? We are beings of light. We are destined for great things. So it's not about getting rid of ourselves; it's about refining ourselves, and that is a very, very difficult thing to do. But that's exactly what Jesus models, right? To lose yourself in the service of others, to lose yourself, your ego, not your personhood, but your ego, in the service of others, which is compassion. I mean, that's the root of the word compassion, or what it means in Latin. The passion means to suffer, and come means with. So to have compassion, right? To be with them, to enter into their experience. That, again, that's the heart of what Jesus does. He empties himself in Gethsemane and on the cross so that he can enter into our life, and then lift us up. And he's God. I'm not. So I'm just practicing. But at least I know kind of what it looks like in theory.
Now, the other side of that is the side that Alana tends to experience, is the questions, is the, are the concerns. So I want to speak a little bit to that now. But before we do, could we return to a concept from your book where I didn't really realize that when you wrote that you hadn't found any evidence that Joseph Smith talked about a restored church. Could you speak to that a little bit for us?
Yeah, this was surprising to me, and so I want to be careful how I say this, and I think I frame it pretty carefully in the book. So certainly Joseph Smith had the concept of the restoration of the church, and this understanding, and he and the early saints understood that the church was in some ways a restoration of the primitive church or the New Testament church. But what's really interesting, and now we can do this because of the Joseph Smith papers, which you can access online, we have the ability, you can search literally everything that Joseph Smith ever wrote or that was written. I mean, obviously we don't have a record of all of his words, but based on the written historical evidence that is available to us, you can search everything just from your own computer. And so I started searching, because I wanted to find some quotes about what Joseph Smith said about the restored church. And it turns out he'd never used that phrase, never once. And nobody else around him used it. Same thing with the restored gospel. And it's not until decades later that those, and really in the 20th century, that those phrases, the restored church, the restored gospel, become common as part of our language. Now, of course, the concepts were there, but I'm just talking about the actual phrase. And so that got me into thinking, well, then what? I know we use the word restoration a lot, and I know the word restoration shows up a lot in the Revelations and in the Book of Mormon. So what does it refer to? And long story short, most of the time, it refers to either the restoration of Israel or the restoration of the Lamanites. And what these groups have in common is this notion of scattering, this notion that these are people to whom God has made promises. But these are people who, in the historical experience that we know, they've been scattered, they've been marginalized, they've been persecuted, they've been vulnerable, right? And so it seems to me, and there's these beautiful phrases, both in the Book of Mormon and in the Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord talks about the restoration of my people. And I think that is the essence of it. And so in our restoration scripture, most of the time when it talks about restoration, it's talking about God restoring people to wholeness, not things like church and temple and priesthood. And that's all important. But all of those things, the restoration of all things, which is a phrase I grew up with and taught on my mission and so forth. The restoration of all things is really important, but God isn't interested in things. Ultimately, God is interested in people. And so those things are meant to restore people to wholeness. That's what God is trying to do in the restoration, and hopefully what we are too.
And you speak in your book to some of those things that I am now connecting with the concept of scattering, of people being marginalized. And so what is huge to me is I don't think I've picked up many books from faithful church members and leaders who will really talk about these things. So you talk about racism, you address patriarchy, nationalism, which is a huge one, colonialism, inequality. That is very unusual. And so this is where I want to bring you in, Alana. What do we do when we have pain? What is so many members of the church right now are experiencing pain or feeling marginalized, or simply when they go to church, there's a lot of anxiety around that. So could you maybe speak to the experience of Alana? I guess, is there a way that you would like to frame where you're at in a more helpful way, because I'm aware that I'm speaking for you not very well here?
Nothing like being put in the spot, Jane. I guess for me, like, I always say, it kind of goes back to just without mentioning names. I've struggled, like, I've been in and out of the church my whole life, as I've said on my own podcast that I did. I ended up coming back. I served a mission, through that time, through things that happened in my life. I left, came back, I had my daughter and I felt I needed something, so I went back again. And I guess, like, just over the past few years, like just prior to lockdown, I was just struggling with a few things that I wasn't okay about, specifically LGBTQ, which I've always not really been okay about. But the more things that were being said, I was finding more and more difficult. And as time went on, we then found out that my nephew was part of that community and had a really, really difficult time within the church and how things were handled. And it wasn't very good on his life and the things that he then went on to try and do. So that was really painful and hard for our family. And then through time, certain members of my family who I never thought I would see leaving the church left the church. And it wasn't that I necessarily went looking for it, but for me, it was just a whole mixture of things, abuse in the church. And again, I always speak to that I know it happens everywhere, but I guess for me, it was how it's handled and things. I've spoke to my own experience of a sexual abuse when I was younger. So that really floored me. And then just through that, I just thought, you know, I'm part of a church that I really know nothing about, you know. And so I started looking at things, and that wasn't my main reason for leaving. As I was going to church, and I know this sounds crazy to true believing people, because, you know, the church brings true happiness. I was miserable. I genuinely was miserable. That's the only word I could find. I was miserable. I wasn't feeling that happiness that's spoken about. And the anxiety that crept in, Jane will tell you, like, it was awful. And I felt I had to go because I had a calling within primary as a music director. And it was so bad. You know, I was suffering pain from, obviously, the family members. You know, I was looking, and then obviously gradually as people were leaving, you know, other family members, friends, it just became more and more difficult for me. And I said this to my bishop once, that, you know, I stood up and I choristered the music and sacrament meeting, and I look out and I don't, this probably is going to sound bad, and probably a lot of people would say, but that's just you, you know, and my bishop kind of did shoot it down as well, which kind of annoyed me a little bit. I just see people who look exhausted and tired. And, you know, I know the church is now coming away from a lot of the, you know, the midweek meetings. I mean, my dad was a bishop when we were children, you know, the time that he was away from us, all these things, you know, they're trying to lessen that for families. But I just didn't fully see that light in everyone's eyes that they talk about, you know. And I don't know, it just became more and more difficult for me. And I say this, and I don't say it to offend or anything, but for me, lockdown truly was a blessing for me, because my mental health was being severely affected by attending church. And the main reason for that, sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, was I'm thinking, why are we not talking about the things that are important? Why am I, now I know, you know, for some people that's what they like, but we're going to church and we're talking about the same things that I've been taught my whole life: faith, repentance, missionary work, temple work, you know. And then there's things that we're talking about that, yeah, you know, it's important now and again, but I just feel in the 21st century, these are not the things we should be talking about. We should be talking about the LGBTQ community, in my opinion, how we can better love them and, you know, help them, and how we can just love everyone in general, you know, and just all the difficult things. And I know that, you know, there's possibly reasons for that, why the church don't, but I just feel like I just wasn't getting from the church what I needed. I wasn't getting that real raw discussion on things. And again, I always go back to that. I didn't feel I had a voice as a woman, first and foremost, and just in general, because I just felt that you couldn't, if you did have a different opinion, I don't feel comfortable that I can sit and, you know, challenge that. And I would never do it in a way that was, when I say challenge, I don't mean like, you know, I disagree and, you know, really harsh, but just to say, I have a difference of opinion here. Mm-hmm. Because you feel judged, you feel viewed as a wee bit apostate, you know, or if you try to get someone to look at something a different way. And so church was just miserable for me, miserable. And obviously going back to all the things that I've looked back at, which I was taught in the church, which is wrong, and I know certain things that are coming away from now, I thought, I can't have my daughter raised in a church that teaches you to feel the pain that I've felt of feeling not good enough. That's been one of the top things. And I'm not saying it's just the church. There was other reasons and things that happened in my life that caused that. But when I've been processing things over this past year or two, I've realised that a lot of that also comes from the teachings within the church. I'm not saying it's the church specifically. I always say the church, but we know that church culture comes in. You know, people teach things because somebody said this, somebody said that, you know. But the things that we were told, and I think, you know, and it just, I feel like I've just went, big blur. But yeah, I feel that there's other people sitting within the walls of our church who are feeling the same, but just too afraid to speak up. And that saddens me, because like you say, when it comes back to Jesus, he would want us to talk about our pain. He would want us to be talking about all the things that we find hard, the things that we're struggling with. And I just feel we just go to church and just, it's the same stuff over and over. Like Jane will tell you, like we would find out what the Relief Society lesson was, and I'd be like, oh no, I can't, you know. And I did for a time. I struggled to sometimes I wasn't able to sit through the class because I'm just like, I've heard it all before, you know. And they always say there's something new to learn, but I just thought I wasn't learning anything new. And part of that was my attitude, because I was just like, I'm done. I can't listen to this same stuff over and over and over. And it just became too painful for me. And as I say, there's a lot of pain within my family directly that's been caused through things within the church, which is sad. Sorry, I just went on a pure rant there.
That's what happens, I think, when someone is listening to you. And I just want to thank you, Professor Mason, because that was lovely that you gave Alana the time to express that. That's pretty huge.
I know this is about you, not me.
Yeah. Do you have? I feel like we're taking you back to your previous book, but what do you say when someone has so much pain?
Well, my heart breaks, honestly. Thanks, Alana. Life is really hard. Life is brutal, right? And I think there's a temptation in every organized religion that the organization of it can sometimes smother the spark that gives it life. Sometimes people talk about churchianity instead of Christianity, right? And what Jesus invites us into is a relationship of love and a relationship of joy. And it's not to minimize or to trivialize the pain of the world, but that's where Jesus goes to find us, right? And I think our community sometimes does really well at this in terms of ministering to people who are in sorrow and who are in pain and who are struggling. But we also have big blind spots. And sometimes we really struggle to know that. I think there are certain kinds of pain and sorrow that we're better at ministering to than other kinds.
Yep, I would totally 100% agree with that.
And I think we have real gifts as a community in terms of some of our kinds of ministry, but it means that there are other gifts out there that we haven't yet perfected. And I'm a big believer in Paul's metaphor of the body of Christ, and we need all the parts. And sometime in the church, we've done a really good job through correlation and through kinds of things of cultivating certain kinds of gifts in the church, right? Whether you want to say it's the hand or the lung or whatever body part you want to think about. And we've attracted people who are kind of that kind of body part, or we've tried to fit other people, fit everybody to say these are the kinds of body parts that we do in this church. But what Paul says is we need all the parts. We need all the parts. And in fact, what he says, I think is one of the most beautiful and true passages in the New Testament. He says, we give greater honor to the parts who think that they are lesser. And we don't always do a great job of that in this church. So I think, I never tire of hearing messages of repentance, because it is a gospel of repentance. I mean that not in a harsh way. I mean that it is the good news of transformation. It is the good news that Jesus brings into the world, that the world doesn't have to be this way. The world is beautiful and lovely and rotten and horrible all at the same time. And what Jesus says is the world that we live in now, we can work together to make it a better one. That's what the vision of Zion is. I mean, at the heart of our religion are two things. It's Jesus and it's Zion. And we can do so much better, I think, to minister to the poor among us, not only the temporally poor, but the poor in spirit, the people who are feeling poorly, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and otherwise when they're among us. We're not all going to be happy when we go to church. That's part of the deal, right? We go there to hopefully find a little bit of solace, to find a little bit of peace. But if we're not imparting that, then I think we need to do better. So, Alana, my heart just breaks that the church hasn't always been there for you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's okay.
How beautiful to see that modelled, to have honest, vulnerable conversations. That I thank you both so much for that. I know that the internet signal is kind of causing a few problems here, so I do apologise again, and thank you for your patience about this. There's something more I'd like to address before we come back and talk a little bit more about marginalised groups. You are full of hope, and I love that. I think that's instinctively how I sort of tend to feel as well. In the United Kingdom, we have been seeing plummeting church attendance numbers. We've had a question from friend of the podcast, Mormon Civil War host, our friend Peter Bleakley, has asked if we could maybe speak a little bit about church growth. The worry from a lot of members in the United Kingdom is that the church is in decline and that we might not have a church 5-10 years from now. You see a church that will grow, right? You see a church that is, you're very hopeful about that. So could you maybe speak to the fact that we're very, very worried about what we're seeing here? We don't want to lose our church. It seems almost like it's inevitable. Is it inevitable?
I hope not. But the perpetual presence and growth of the church is certainly not inevitable. Right?
I did not expect you to say that. Okay, that's wow.
It's not, especially in any given area and in any local area. And this is where I think especially in the late 20th century church, the church that I grew up in, and we were so addicted to the language of growth, right? We loved all those general conference reports that talked about how many new members we had. We loved all those charts that, were going straight up. There were scholars who said that Mormonism was the fastest growing religion in the world. I'm not sure it ever actually was, but it was growing really fast. It was globalizing. It was a very heady time to be a Latter-day Saint in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, even into the first decade of this century, right? And I think we got addicted to that. But that in some ways, growth is a false idol on its own. And especially growth for growth's sake. And this, I think President Hinckley oftentimes talked about this. He says, we're not interested just in baptizing people. We're interested in making disciples of Jesus, right? So this is why he talked about, the work that we do with converts. It's not just about getting people into the church. And so we've seen that growth slow, and I think we're seeing negative growth in a lot of places. Even while we see positive growth in other places around the world. So numerical growth is not inevitable, especially in any local place. But you're exactly right. I'm full of hope. I think partly just dispositionally or temperamentally. I think my wife is sometimes annoyed at me because I'm a glasses half full guy. But I'm hopeful. My hope is theologically grounded, and I mean this in a couple of different ways. One of my favorite sayings is from Dr. Martin Luther King, where he said, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. In other words, if I'm a God believer, especially if I'm a Jesus believer, if I believe in the resurrection, if I believe in ultimately what has been promised to us, I believe that we already know what the end of the story is. And the end of the story is that good and righteousness and truth and virtue and love all those things win in the end. They all win. And that Jesus's team wins, right? That's what the whole book of Revelation is. It's actually a very complicated book with a very simple message, which is simply Jesus wins, God wins, love wins. And but it's going to take a long time to get there. But I have hope in that. I also have hope in our community because I see so much goodness in our community. As we just talked about, I see where we fall short, of course. But I think that the more we put ourselves on the side of Jesus, the more we hitch our wagon to his kingdom. And sometimes that'll be reflected in numerical growth. Sometimes it'll be reflected in a kind of growth that is more about a deepening than a broadening. Right? Sometimes our discipleship will not be manifest in terms of growing congregations, but sometimes it will be manifest in terms of better congregations, congregations that really take care of one another and lives and families and individuals who are becoming deeper disciples of Jesus and manifest that into the world. So, yeah, I actually am quite hopeful. The other thing that I talk about in the book is that as a counter to this narrative of growth that we had in the church for most of my life, when you look in the scriptures, Jesus, there is the language of the stone cut out of the mountain that rolls and fills the whole earth, right? And that's the one we always come back to. But actually, the majority of references to the church or to Jesus's followers, certainly the references that Jesus used himself, all refer to the smallness of the church. Salt and light and yeast. Nephi prophesied that the church would be scattered around the world, but that its dominions would be small. So actually, most of the prophecies about the church in the latter days and about the followers of Jesus refer to their numerical smallness, but their outsized influence. That's what salt and light and yeast do. They're very small in terms of their actual mass, but they have a disproportionate effect on everyone and everything around them. And that, to me, is the better metaphor. It's the more common metaphor throughout Scripture. And so I'm less, yes, I want more people to come and experience the joy of the gospel. I want people to encounter Jesus. I want more people to come in and build Zion. We need the gifts of everybody, right? We need to bring in people with their gifts so that we build the body of Christ. So yes, I want to open our doors and bring people in. But I'm as interested, if not more interested, in the quality of Zion than the quantity of church members.
I just had a wee thought there, just as you were talking. It might be relevant, it might not. Just as you were talking, obviously, about, the bringing in the numbers and things like that, took me kind of back to, and I hate to be one of these people that says, takes me back to my mission, but just because I hate somebody's like, I remember my mission,
I just love the fact that you're doing it.
I know, and I hate it too. But it's just like when you were talking about that, I think not even just my mission, just even my lifetime being in the church. I think that's, again, I'm not saying it's the church's fault completely, but I think there is part responsibility here, as well as the people who are serving the missions have to take responsibility. I remember a story from when I was younger. A missionary baptizing someone, and they weren't fully invested in the gospel, just so they could, and he wanted to go and baptize them in, say Loch Lomond, for instance, right? Just some, just for to say, oh, I baptized somebody, and I think there's too much of that within the church. I don't think we spend enough time converting people to truly convert them to the gospel. I think and this is my own personal opinion, I just feel sometimes there's too much of a rush to extend that invitation of baptism. And what's happening is we're not retaining people. I went on my mission and we had to have numbers and we had to have, this is how many people we want to baptize. And I've got to admit, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I hated it for one reason, because I was like, these people are not numbers, they're people. And that for me was, I did it with my companion because we had to give numbers to the APs and the mission president, etc. But I hated it because you know, I'm not blowing one trumpet anyway. I'm not good at a lot of things, but one thing I am good is at loving people. And for me, I wasn't the missionary who was the great teacher. I was far from it. Like, I got so nervous teaching, but I just loved people. I was myself with people. And I think that's what made the difference. And that's where I struggle. I feel we need to spend more time with people if we're going to be teaching people, because we've seen, and especially in our ward, so many people who have joined the church in the last couple of years, and they're no longer there. And I feel personally a lot of it is because it's too quick to get them into the waters of baptism. And I think we need to truly put the word out there as a church that we need to spend more time with people to really help them to understand truly what they're getting into. Because what is the point of baptizing people if we're not retaining them? Because then they do just become a number.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And there's actually some really good scholarly studies of the way that our church compares to other similar churches, namely the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventists, who have also experienced significant growth around the globe during the same period that our church did. But their retention rates are much, much higher, much higher. And there's lots of reasons why, but two of the main reasons are exactly what you're talking about. That they take much longer before somebody formally becomes a member of their church. So there's a much longer discernment process for what we would call the investigator, right? And then which includes then a much more intentional process of formation, right? So it's not just missionaries, teaching a few lessons and feeling like, okay, they're ready for baptism, right?
And I think that is what's happening a lot, though.
Yeah, and that's the way that the system got set up in recent decades, with a lot of positive results, but then a lot of very low retention rates as well. And so you reap what you sow. We've done that in terms of the way that we have structured the missionary program. We've brought in a lot of people. We've retained a relatively low percentage of them. But I do know that the missionary department is always looking at this. They're always thinking about this. And I just think that even whether or not the missionary department changes anything structurally, I think at the local level, we can do exactly what President Hinckley did and really pay attention to the formation of converts. We don't get to dictate who gets baptized or when, because that's under the purview of the full-time missionaries and mission presidents. But the formation is the real key. And frankly, other churches do it better than we do right now.
Yeah. I think it's just important to teach our missionaries, really teach them growing up, as they're preparing for missions, that it's not, about the numbers. Because I think a lot of missionaries go out with that theory, like, oh, I want to be able to baptize loads of people. But to realise that that's not what everyone's mission is about. Great if you baptize people. But like I say, I didn't have a lot of baptisms on my mission. But I know that I, through just being myself and loving people, changed people's lives. Like, I had a great experience on a mission with one specific person. And I think for me, that's what's most important. It's just, like I always say, it can be that preparatory work. You could be there to just do that preparatory work for maybe 5 years down the line for them to truly be ready to join the church. But if we get people at the wrong time, they're not going to stay. And that, and I feel like we're letting people down by doing that. Yeah. By just saying, because I feel like, especially when it was like, right, as soon as you feel the spirit, the time's right, just invite. But I feel like sometimes there was that pressure to get the baptism, so you felt like you were inviting when the time wasn't right. And I think that's something.
Yeah, I mean, Paul said about missionaries, some are called to plant, others to cultivate, others to harvest, right? And sometimes we focus only on the harvesting, and without recognizing the other parts. So.
Me and my Fortress Church inspired ego wants to jump in at the moment and ask about people returning to church activity. The friends that I miss, their faces, I miss the experiences, the community, the people that I associate with church. We want them to come back, but the part of me, and I know others, that worries about what that will look like. Will you come back as long as you will be the same person, or as or if you will be some other version of it that's just the way you looked before, maybe with a few tweaks? Can we have people come back changed by what they've learned, with questions and discomforts? And how would that look if Alana was to come back right as you are now with all of that pain?
Yeah, I hope she would find a lot of people who just embraced her and said, "Thanks for coming." Right? I mean, I hope our ethos is that anybody who wants to worship or discover Jesus in our congregations is welcome. Right? Now, that's not to say we dispense with all the teachings and the commandments and all those kinds of things, but the only requirement for entry, so to speak, is desire. Right? Do you want to be here? Does any part of you want to be here? And if so, then thanks for being here. We love you. We embrace you, and then let's go from there. I think oftentimes our 2-hour block of meetings it's not set up very well for ministering to every person's individual pain and questions, right? I mean, it's a collective experience. Often, we are oftentimes addressing the kind of lowest common denominator, or the kind of things that we can all sort of kind of more or less agree on, right? So this is why what happens outside church or in the hallways of the church, right? Or at dinner on a Friday night, or on a Sunday night, or at lunch on a Tuesday, or something like that. That's every bit as important and sacred as what happens, in those 2 hours on Sunday. So those 2 hours on Sunday are really important. They play a really important purpose, but they are necessary but not sufficient. Our discipleship, our ministry, our compassion, our outreach, our formation, none of that can be limited to those 2 hours, because again, they are an effective tool to accomplish certain kinds of things, but no one tool can accomplish all things. And so much of what needs to be done has to be done in the one-on-one kind of ministry, again, that the Savior modeled.
I know that I love what you're saying. Hallway church, we've had some of the most sacred experiences
Yep.
out in the hallway, having to leave.
And I will say I'm a very unpopular person for expressing this opinion. I actually regret the move from 3-hour to 2-hour church. I know that puts me in a very distinct minority, but one because I think we lost two things when we went from three things when we went from 3 hours to 2 hours. One, for those of us with parents, we lost an hour of free babysitting. That was precious. That was a precious hour to us. Two, we lost. I really think we lost some community building, and third, we missed hallway church, right? Or we reduced hallway church and those kinds of serendipitous conversations and so forth. So again, I will plant my flag on that very unpopular hill.
Well, the beauty of it is things are so responsive and changing. I mean, I guess we don't know what the future is going to hold there.
Yeah.
I don't know. But what I think one of the blessings of the pandemic for me has been that we have had to do things differently. I remember an online church meeting where someone I'd never met, it was, a worship with the wonderful people from Community of Christ who had done some online stuff. And as the pandemic sort of heightened, people had to do online church. It was a great option. If you want to worship, that's the way you're going to have to do it if you want that community. And I remember a lady that I'd never spoken to before was saying, I feel more seen today. I feel like I've been able to connect with people more than I do on Sundays because I don't feel seen on Sunday. Please don't let's go back to the way things were before. And it just really spoke to my soul. As a parent of a son with special needs, who we had to accept, very painfully, that church doesn't work for our son. And I hate that. And it's such a loss to our church community. but that's what it is. And so we have all of these opportunities to do things different. And yet, again, it's coming back to what you're saying in the book. We're trying to go back to the way things were, when what we now are recognizing is that we need something different, we need something new, or to try new things. That's what gives me hope. That's what I find really exciting, that how different can things look? What are the possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, what gives me hope is the ninth article of faith. I love it. It's one of my favorite ones. Not only all the stuff that God has given us and gives us now, but we believe that God's going to give us a whole lot more, right? That's this belief in continuing revelation, not just to President Nelson and the leaders in Salt Lake, but to every single one of us. And that this restoration, I think one of the most useful phrases we have in the current church is the notion of an ongoing restoration. And that is for every single one of us to not just wait passively for, but to be anxiously engaged in, right? This is our church. God has called us to this church. He calls us to be builders of it, to be builders of Zion, to be builders of the kingdom of God. We do so in community, right? So we don't all just do kind of our own thing, right? We do. So the community both empowers us, it checks us, it limits us, but it also gives us opportunities to learn and to grow. And so, yeah, I hope the same thing. I hope that as we all come back, that we feel empowered to. I doubt there's going to be very many radical changes, right? I mean, the basic structures of the church are going to stay the same, but we as individuals are going to be different. And so we're the ones who breathe life into those structures. We're the ones who actually give shape and form to them. And so, especially at the local level, Mormonism is ours, right? It is, we are the ones who make it up.
You sound like Jane.
Yeah. And I just absolutely, and we do it together. We do it together. And that's what I love.
See, I would love to have the hope. Like, I've spoke to Jane about this many times, but I just, where I'm at right now, I can't have that hope that things are going to change and that things are going to be better, after a lifetime in the church, and obviously as you're growing up, you go along with it because it's what you're taught, and, and then you get a bit older and you kind of do your, in the UK, certainly, you're pulled into the world a wee bit and you kind of go back and forward. But there's just, for me at the minute, there's too much that needs to change, and I just can't ever see that change. And the things that I need to change, I don't ever see changing. Whereas Jane always has that. Like, she says, I really hope and I'm excited about the changes. I just don't have that hope right now. And I want to have it, but I just can't where I'm at right now, which is hard because I hear you talking about that hope, and it does tug at my heart a little bit, but I just don't have that hope right now. And I feel there's a lot of people who feel the same,
Because again, to remind you all, here, some of the ideas that you're talking about and you're, talking about God's call to the 21st century world, we often talk about, returning to church or church growth or hope for the church, what the future is going to be like is some kind of version of Joseph's church of the 19th century, or even, the church anciently in the ancient Near East. And that's not what we're looking for. So I guess what I'm going to come on and ask is, what can the church in the 20th century look like? What do you see as some of the possibilities?
I see us as I actually do think that the models that we have in the New Testament and in the Book of Mormon should be really guiding principles for us. They should be our North Star. So Acts 2 and 4, and then 4th Nephi. And so I think of communities of committed, covenanted followers of Jesus who love each other. And there are no manner of ites among them. And so, of course, we all have our differences. Again, that's the beauty of it. That's what Paul calls us to, is to bring all of our diversity into the church and consecrate it on the altar. But our diversity doesn't lead to fracture. our diversity doesn't lead to contention, that actually our diversity leads to embracing the beauty and the richness of God's community, and that we do that together, and we do that in a community that teaches one another and loves one another and serves one another, and then a community that orients all that love outward into the world, right? That one of my friends and mentors, Richard Bushman, who's a great scholar and historian, he talks about radiant Mormonism, that the sort of power that we build inside of our families and inside of our wards, that just radiates outward into the world. It's never meant to be kept inside. It's meant to radiate. Now, we can't do it all, right? We're tiny, right? We're tiny globally. We're tiny locally. And so we have to be choosy and selective, but there's got to be something that we can do, right? Do you have refugees in your community? Do you have homeless or unsheltered people that you can reach out to? Do you have, can you help with literacy issues? Can you, whatever it is, hunger, can you start a prison ministry? Whatever it is, right? And again, we can't do it all, but we can do something. And so does the love and the strength that we build within our congregations, can we radiate outwards? And so that's what I think the church looks like in the 21st century. I think it looks like a central organization that does some really important and great things centrally, right? So I love that the church is sending out all this humanitarian aid and so forth, right? I'm very happy about that, but I'm not part of it, except distantly. So I want the church to do that at scale, right? In a way, they just sent a bunch of food to Afghanistan. I can't send a bunch of food to Afghanistan. What is my $10 going to do anything, right? But my $10, multiplied, the church can have a big impact. Okay, great. But then, so we do that, and then we do it at the local level too. And I think we just have to, that's my vision for local churches, is that we love one another, we teach one another, we serve one another, and then we go out in the world and do the same.
And this is why you're so well loved. That's it.
There's nothing new about this, right? I mean, right? This is 4th Nephi. This is Acts 2 and 4. This is Alma 1. This is what the church has always looked like in the world.
Always has looked like, because it's not now, in my opinion.
Still today. Not as good as we could be, but there's
there's all this good that's happening out there, and I think when there's pain, it is really difficult to, when you're in pain, you can't. You're in survival mode.
Yeah,
I want to use this opportunity then to just, if there's any questions that anyone would like us to try and sneak in before we get to this. The thing that everyone's been speaking about this week, I say this week, it's only Wednesday. I think Monday
but it's been so huge though.
Yeah, Monday was a lot to process. Our whole audience are not necessarily going to be aware of what we're talking about. So I'm going to be very, very general and, not spend too much time in giving the details. I'll let you all, go and find out for yourselves. So what I would like to ask is, for those of us who have been aware of the talk that was given this week at BYU by Elder Holland, there is a great deal of pain. So while we're not going to go into the content of the talk at this time, it is available online if anyone would like to go and take a look at it. What we'd like to do is invite Professor Mason. Would you share your thoughts?
Yeah, it has been a tough week, and it was for me, it was a difficult talk to listen, to read first, and then I listened to it later. And partly it's because I love Elder Holland so much. He is an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ, and his teachings have been so instrumental in my formation as a Christian. And I actually love so much of what he said in this talk, that I do think BYU should be different, right? I think BYU has a special role in the landscape of higher education. I believe that we should be able to consecrate our education and our higher learning and our research, to doing good and to building the kingdom of God. But I also acknowledge, look, I'm very committed to nonviolence. So I was troubled by his the imagery and the language that he used in terms of muskets, and I understand the way he was doing it, and I absolutely 100% believe, of course, he was not in any way trying to incite violence against individuals, that he was using it purely metaphorically. But the words we use matter. And so I wish he did talk about the time when we would beat our swords into plowshares, that beautiful prophecy from Isaiah. I wish that he had modeled that rather than simply anticipated that. And I, most of all, my heart breaks because of so many of our LGBTQ sisters and brothers who felt attacked yet again. And they feel like that they were made out to be the aggressors rather than oftentimes the victims. I think we need to be more careful sometimes in the way that we talk, and to be attendant to kind of power relations in terms of who has the power in any given circumstance and who is relatively powerless, and be mindful of that in the way that we talk about one another. So I'm deeply sympathetic, and I think I understand what Elder Holland was trying to communicate and did communicate. I personally wish that maybe he had, some of his framing and some of the way he had done so. I might have done it a little bit differently, but he also has a different calling and perspective than I do. So, but I acknowledge it was a very tough week for a lot of our members and friends and ex-members. And unfortunately, I saw some people for whom they said this is the last straw, right? And I was trying to hold on, and I feel like I can't. So my heart just breaks for that, even while I think I understand what Elder Holland was trying to communicate in that talk. So.
See, I think for me that was one of the difficult things for me, because Elder Holland was always one of my favourite speakers growing up. And again, because it directly affects my family, it was really painful for me to read. Like when Jane sent me it, if you don't know if you remember, like I didn't even message you back straight away. I just done one of the wee faces because I just didn't have words at that moment. And I think, like, I understand what you're saying about, you think you understand where he's trying to come from, and but not everyone has that same understanding. And I think, for me, with the utmost respect, I think, if you believe, I don't know where I stand right now with believing if they do speak to God or not, but if they, profess to speak to God, then surely there was a better way for him to say that, to not cause the pain to people. And that's one of the things I struggle with. Some of the things that we are saying within the walls of the church and from the top are causing people so much pain. And I don't believe that the God that I want to believe in would cause that pain to our people. Because like you said, it's about love. It's not about causing people pain. And I've seen too much pain caused by words from people within the church in our local wards, and also through who are supposed to be prophets, and in my opinion, know better. I always go back to, I know people say they're human, they make mistakes. I get that. But for me, that just me personally, and I don't want to come across too harsh, for me, that's just not good enough, to say that they're human, they make mistakes. They profess to speak with God. They say they speak on behalf of God, and my God wouldn't hurt people. And that's just how I view it. I can't see why. And I want to believe, and I don't think I do believe, that he did it. I don't think he wanted to cause people pain, but unfortunately he has. And once words are said, we can't take them back. So things need to be thought long and hard about before they're said, to realise how they impact people. I get that, it's because of the teachings within the church and that's what they believe. But I still think we've got to be so careful and so respectful to all people and not hurting them.
And I think it's about more than just not saying from tactful, you're trying to be tactful and not say the thing that, because that's church teaching, so we'll just avoid the subject completely. People are asking for conversations around LGBTQ, marginalization and inequalities, and not just that, there are many other of these types of subjects. And so my question is, I think, first of all, the fact that it was Elder Holland was huge. He's Elder Holland. We love Elder
I used to
Holland.
say he was my main man. Elder
And
Holland was my main man. I
yeah,
loved him.
so there are perhaps apostles that we would have maybe expected it from or not been surprised by. So I think there is the pain that comes from a lack of or a breaking of trust or confidence. What do we do with, because let's face it, this happens every conference. What do we do with those conference talks that are designed to uplift and edify and support, but that cause huge amounts of pain within the community? How do we deal with that fallout?
Yeah, I think it is. This is an enormously important, but also difficult and complex topic. I actually think it's. I think it's one of the most. I don't want to abstract this, but I'm going to go abstract for just a moment. Meaning that I don't want to abstract from kind of people's pain, but I think that the question of what it means for us to claim that we have living prophets and apostles, right? That is a bedrock claim of this church. It is a claim I do not want to let go of, right? But I think one of our tasks in the 21st century is to actually think through and better talk about what that means. What is the calling of a prophet or an apostle? What is our relationship to them? What does it mean to sustain them? What does it mean for us to think that God talks to them, but they still have their agency, right? That they're not perfect, but we still believe that they're messengers of God, right? I just think that there's this whole messy kind of theology of prophets and apostles that we haven't wrestled with. So it means that we're kind of all over the place when we have these kinds of conversations, right? And good theology allows you to better make sense of what's actually going on the ground, right? So it should never just stay in the clouds, but it should help you. So I think we have to do that, but we're not there yet. And so it is hard, and we do continue to struggle. And because look, here's one of the things is if we look at the biblical prophets, they oftentimes said really hard things, right? I mean, they were oftentimes deeply unpopular precisely because they said things that the people hated hearing, right? Now, I don't even like saying that because I don't like saying, isn't it great that Jeremiah said things that caused people a lot of pain? Right now, on the one hand, we said, oh, well, it's fine when Jeremiah or Isaiah is talking about idolatry and so forth, those stupid people who were all idol worshipers, right? But it's when current prophets and apostles say things that are hard for us to hear, is it more like that, or is it more like that they're causing unnecessary pain, right? And so it's so complicated. One of the spiritual practices I've tried to develop in recent years, and it doesn't solve the problem, but it helps me, is that you're exactly right. Like I have my speakers in general conference or even in my local ward that when they stand up, I'm like, great, like this is going to be a great talk. I can't wait for this apostle, right? Or for this, my friend in the ward to give this talk, right? And I kind of sit up and listen, and they say things that I already agree with, and then I pat myself on the back and say, look, what a good Christian I am, right? But then there are also apostles or members of my ward who, when they stand up, I'm like, I think I need to go to the bathroom, or I think, this is the time to go get some snacks or something like that, right? But actually, I've tried to cultivate the spiritual discipline of listening extra hard to them. And they may say something that I think is wrong or that offends me or something like that. But I'm also trying to lean in to say, it may be more likely that God has something to teach me through them than through the person I'm inclined to agree with. And they may have something that is going to force me to think hard, and I might they may not appreciate they put it the way they put it or something like that, but they're going to force me to reassess my own relationship with God, my own thinking, my own position on something, and maybe I'm going to learn more. It's been a helpful thing for me. It doesn't eliminate the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. Sometimes our leaders or our fellow members say things that they're simply hurtful, right? And that cause pain for a lot of people. So I don't want to eliminate that, but this is difficult. This is what it means to be part of a church. And it's one of the most difficult and sometimes rewarding parts of being part of a spiritual community. But it causes an enormous pain. And I think this goes back to our earlier conversation. We're not very good Christians if we don't acknowledge the pain that it's causing. Even if it didn't cause pain for me, if it caused pain for somebody else, that matters.
Absolutely.
One of the, really faithful members in our chat, one of our friends of the podcast, Debbie, had talked about this week, just holding space for people who were feeling pain. And, my Fortress Church defensive colleagues all had to, sort of rush in and defend what was being said, or, make it clear that we didn't have a problem with what Elder Holland said. It's Elder Holland. Of course, if you have a problem with that, then it's your problem. And what I love is that we have all of these examples within our church of people modeling what we can do just to hold space. If it hurts, I will take your hand and I will sit in the hallway with you, and we will wait till it passes, and I will mourn with you, and hopefully be part of building a better church where we can be better. We can do better. Okay. I really appreciate everything that you've been sharing tonight. This has been wonderful. Is there anything that you would like to share with us in closing? Do you have any comments or thoughts that you would love to share with our audience?
No, I mean, are there any questions I haven't been really reading the chat. Is there anything in there that you want to talk about, or have we kind of covered it along the way?
Everything that we've had sort of previously we've covered. So yeah,
okay,
lots of things about Elder Holland and how we're processing that, and we're going to be processing it for a long while to come. That's just the nature of it. So yeah, if there's anything that you would like to share in closing.
Yeah, I think here are some closing thoughts. I mean, I really believe and feel that God is working in this church right now. I believe God's working other places too, right? As I talk about in the book, our heavenly parents love all of their children, not just 0.2% of their children. But I do really feel that God is working in the church, and sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 3 steps sideways, or and we don't even know sometimes which direction we're going. Are we going forward or backward at any given moment? Sometimes it's hard to tell, especially in the at the time. But what I really hope for, I don't know if you're seeing this in the UK, we're certainly seeing it in the United States right now, is that members of the church are the church in some ways is coming apart at the seams, and it's largely doing so around issues of politics and culture. That people, I mean, the very polarized, fractured political environment that we have in the United States right now. And right now, people are bringing that into the church in really unfortunate ways, especially on social media, but even in person. Again, I don't know what it looks like over there. But what I really hope for, that's not what the church is supposed to be. Right? The church is not supposed to be a reflection of the politics of Babylon. The church is supposed to be a reflection of the politics of Zion. The church is supposed to be a prophetic witness of the love of God in the world. The church is supposed to be the place where we model what it looks like to love one another in all of our diversity and imperfection as we come together to worship and to follow Jesus. The church is supposed to be the model to the world of what love one another looks like. And my greatest fear for the 21st century church is that we'll pull ourselves apart, and that we will forget one another. We'll forget the ties that bind. We'll forget the bonds of charity that are supposed to tie us together. And we'll forget what it's like, that our hearts will wax cold towards one another. So that's my greatest fear, but my greatest hope, and my confidence, because I am a glasses half full guy. I think we have all of the structures. I think we have the gifts. And again, I feel the Holy Spirit working in the church to call us to repentance, to call us to a better way, to call us to the way of love, to call us to the way of Jesus, and that the church becomes the laboratory where we learn to love one another. And I see that in my congregation. I see that other places. I see it not fulfilled in other places, right? That's where it breaks your heart breaks, not because the world conforms to what you expected. Your heart breaks when the world doesn't conform to what you had hoped for, right? And that's when my heart breaks, when Alana talks about her experiences, or when so many other people, because we should be better in the church. We should do better. We should know better. And so my heart breaks, but also my heart soars because I know that the Holy Spirit is working in the church. And I know that our heavenly parents, they just want to restore us to wholeness. And the church is one means of doing that. That's my hope. Whether you're in the UK or the US or Ghana or Nigeria or the Philippines or Mexico or wherever, God is working among their children.
I'm so thankful that I got to spend this time surrounded by people who know how to love and who are trying to bring that into the world. This was wonderful. I want to share this comment as we wrap up then from Anthony, who is a Utah Mormon, and says, Patrick, I have to say that your book Restoration has been a most influential book in my faith reformation. Thanks for your courage to write it and be on these types of podcasts. You mean wonderful
Thanks,
podcast,
Anthony.
Anthony, right? Yeah. And our friend Deborah, Mormon Civil War, they're all thanking you for your time. Alana, anything you want to say in closing?
I always say it, just love. Just love.
Just love.
That's, for me, that's what it's about, is love.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, and just don't forget, we do have our book giveaway. Jane has a copy. Of the book to give away. So I think it was to like the original post, wasn't it?
Yeah, come.
Well, maybe need to reshare it. Yeah.
Just send us a message.
And maybe the next week or two we'll pick a name, and whoever wins will get the book. And if you already have it, give it to me.
It's worth.
I still to read your book yet, Patrick.
Give it as presents. You guys need to read it, and Debbie's got one.
Yeah.
She's excited.
Well, I seen someone in the comments had said that they had bought a copy, but they'd also bought 3 or 4 other copies to give out to family and friends or something like that.
So many good reviews. So many people are talking about this book. So I highly, highly recommend it. What we like to do at the, as we close up our episode, is just to sort of share as sisters in the gospel, at whatever stage that we're at whatever stage that our guests are at, we like to share our good wishes. And so we want to just, bless your journey, Professor Mason, and thank you for all of the work that you do, the time that you've given us here, the compassion that you've shown, the modeling that you've been able to show us. Thank you so much, and we bless your work, and we bless you with all that is good in the world. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
With that, everyone, we hope that you'll be able to join us next week. You can catch up on this later. Give us a subscribe and share if you want to catch up with all that we're up to, and we'll end the stream here. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.